For this segment of the program, I wanted to bring things to the back-to-school season, and our Department of Homeland Security has a special back-to-school message for students. And they're pretty much telling our young people, save yourselves during school shootings. And they have a program that is geared towards helping students become first responders in the event of school shootings. I have a lot of mixed feelings about this, and to make better sense of it, we've got our guest, Dr. Joseph Sakran. Dr. Sakran is an assistant professor of surgery, director of emergency general surgery, and associate chief of the Division of Acute Surgery at the Johns Hopkins University Hospital. His past experience is in resource-poor settings, working with underprivileged and minority high school students, and he has a public health background that has provided him with the skill set needed to take on the challenges of improving care among vulnerable populations, both domestically and abroad. As a survivor of gun violence himself, Joe spends a significant portion of his time as a clinician, researcher, and advocate with the primary goal of reducing firearm death and disability in America. And to this end, he recently founded the organization called Docs Demand Action, and you can find them on Twitter at Docs Demand. This is a platform to help unite healthcare providers and provide a strong voice in ending gun violence. Dr. Sakran, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm glad that we have the opportunity to discuss this important issue, so thank you.
Right. So the Department of Homeland Security is offering just under $2 million in grants to local schools and local school districts to teach students how to be first responders. And they specifically mentioned that their goal in this is to help students respond to mass shootings in school. You know, again, like I said at the opener, I have a lot of mixed feelings about this as a public health person, as a physician, as a parent. And I was wanting to bring in your perspective because you are a gun violence survivor, and more specifically, you were a high school senior when you were shot. If it's not too troubling for you to discuss, do you think this kind of a program would have made a difference?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's a very important and timely question. You're correct. I was 17 years old when I was nearly killed after being shot in the throat. And when you look at currently a lot of what's being promoted from a bleeding control standpoint, obviously my own personal incident would not have been helped by the techniques that we're treating folks with, or we're training folks to do. That's not to say that I don't believe in the bleeding control courses that we're actually training folks all across this country. As you know, the Stop the Bleed initiative, which is a partnership with the American College of Surgeons and really devised after Sandy Hook, is really focused on allowing folks to learn proper bleeding control techniques, including how to use their hands, dressings, and tourniquets. So I think there is a role for that. And, just like, the general public learns and performs CPR, being able to address these other issues could be useful. And it could be useful not just for mass shooting events or other disasters, but, you could be at a park and someone, cuts their leg and has a big laceration and is bleeding. I think the real issue is it the effective solution to deal with this overall public health crisis that we're facing in America,
right,
when it comes to gun violence?
Right.
And that's where I think, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and you're touching on an important point here where Pediatricians like me, surgeons like yourself, we have nothing against members of the general public and young people learning CPR, first aid, how to take care of bleeding wounds. It's just that when I look at the Department of Homeland Security talking about, oh, we teach young people driver's ed, this is no different. I feel like they're missing a very important aspects of the context of driver's ed, that we have laws that keep people safe on the road, but we don't really have that same type of legislative infrastructure for gun violence.
Correct. And I think, when you look at a lot of the articles that are coming out, the idea here is that they're saying, well, it's similar to how we teach students about health education and driver's education. Sure, how we're teaching bleeding control is similar to that. But I think we have to really differentiate whether, what we're talking about. If we're talking about, being able to equip young people or the public in general, right, with skills to stop bleeding, yes, I think the Stop the Bleed course is one of the most effective courses. How effective is it going to be to minimizing this public health crisis? Now, when you look at, and there's some very interesting data that's coming out, but when you look at some of these mass shootings, Dr. Serrani and his colleagues published this in 2016, where they looked at mass shootings from 1984 to 2013. And there was a total of 139 people that they evaluated through autopsy reports. And actually, only 20% of those individuals had extremity wounds. And when you look in more detail, in this specific study, there were no deaths due to exsanguination from an extremity. Now, there's some issues with the study because they didn't look at the people that survived and so forth. But the point is when we're looking at all these mass shootings that are happening, how effective is it going to be in saving lives of folks that are actually injured? And I think we still don't know the full answer to that because we need more data. But the data that's currently coming out is showing that it's a minority of individuals that it's actually going to play a big role in. And so then the question is, how do we, implement other measures from a preventive standpoint?
Right. And I think this is where I feel you're touching on some very important points here, that I look at the politics around a program like this that wants to turn everyday students into heroes. And it's not to say that students aren't capable of being heroic and taking on, tough challenges. It's just, I hesitate about putting the responsibility of saving lives on the shoulders of students, because we seem to localize this problem, and we come up with these first responder programs, we have lockdown drills, we have bulletproof backpacks, and it feels like we're putting it upon potential victims to save themselves from a public health problem that all of us should be contributing to preventing.
I think that's exactly correct. And I would just say that, look, stop the bleed or bleeding control techniques is something that everyone should know how to do, but it's not the complete solution to the problem that we're facing. And so really, this requires a multimodal approach that really, from a public health perspective, really is going to require preventative strategy so we can tailor interventions appropriately. And one example that when you think about, things that we can do as a public is look at the new campaign that was just put out last week by the Brady Center, End Family Fire, right? This is, for those that might not know, family fire is defined as a shooting involving an improperly stored or a misused gun that's found in the home, resulting in death or injury. So incidents include unintentional shootings and suicides and other gun-related tragedies. And this is so pertinent because over 4.6 million people, children, right, live in homes with access to loaded and unsupervised guns in their homes, right? And so if we can come together as a community and teach folks how important safe storage is, then potentially we're providing some value there. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. This is just one example, but I think we have to think about this from a preventative perspective.
And there's so many conversations that healthcare providers can have with patients and families that would save lives. And what I want my fellow Americans to understand is that in order for those conversations to be productive, to be the kind of evidence-based, scientific conversations where information is properly trusted and vetted and exchanged, we need to have research. We need to have federally funded research into what works and what does not work. Because the conversations that you would have with patients as a trauma surgeon are going to be very different than what I would have as a pediatrician. And this is where I know that as we're both members of Doctors for America, and one of the campaigns of that organization is to increase and actually start funding research at the CDC and NIH for gun violence prevention. And I was wondering if you could comment about that, on the value and importance of that research.
Yeah, so I think there's really two important points that I just want to make, because this conversation is very rich, and you bring up I think things that we need to focus on. The first is, how do we as healthcare practitioners talk to our patients? I can tell you that the American College of Surgeons Committee on Trauma is actively working on developing educational material for both patients as well as physicians and essentially act as toolkits to help us disseminate some of this information about safe storage, which, frankly, regardless of whether you're a pediatrician or whether you're a trauma surgeon, that type of information, which we obviously hope to have as evidence-based as possible, right, should be the same. That gets to your second point, which is the research piece. And really, I think that this is one of the most critical pieces that's been underfunded over the past 20 years, ever since the Dickey Amendment in the mid-90s. And I think that, Dr. Robert Redfield, who, as you know, is the relatively new CDC director, I would encourage him and his team to really put together a task force on firearm injury and prevention that would help address this. We keep kind of going back and forth between waiting for Congress to appropriate funds, and this is really not getting us anywhere. And because of that, we've seen a lot of different private funders come out and say, you know what, enough is enough. We're not gonna wait for federally funded research. And you saw Kaiser put in $2 million. I want to say the Laura and John Arnold Foundation committed $50 million to this cause. So folks are not going to wait anymore. The American public has really had enough.
Absolutely. And I mean, the lives that we're saving, they vote Democrat, they vote Republican, they live in red states, they live in blue states. And there comes a point where the physicians wanting to save the lives of patients and public health experts wanting to protect communities want to be able to disseminate information without having politics be such an obstacle for productive conversations and action.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I always tell people this is not a Democratic issue. It's not a Republican issue. It's an American issue. And you take a campaign, for example, like the new End Family Fire campaign. That is an apolitical, nonpartisan campaign. In fact, it's even more focused on gun owners. And if you look at even websites, like the NRA website, they also express concerns about safe storage. So regardless of where you sit, we should all be able to get behind concepts like this that are going to make communities safer. And we have, I think, both the possibility and responsibility to act, and there's no better time than the present.
And so if people want to learn more about the Stop the Bleed program and how to find one in their local area, do you have that information offhand that you could share right now?
Yeah, absolutely. They can go to bleedingcontrol.org, and that will provide you with all sorts of information about the course, instructors, and you can see the progress that has been made is really tremendous. I mean, this is a incredible effort that has expanded, beyond institutes or even just, soul communities, with really the goal to train the public, the 300 plus million Americans, in order to ensure that we all have those skills in case we're faced with a situation where we need to control bleeding in an individual.
And Dr. Sakran, I really appreciate you coming on the program to talk about these issues. We're going to keep coming back to gun violence as a public health crisis, and we definitely appreciate your voice.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on today. And I think that, this is such an important topic that, regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, we have the opportunity to kind of make a difference in this, and we need to address this, and the time is now. So thank you very much.